looks like you gotta buy some new shoestrings.
I like these.
Now we're just missing Q and Mimi.
Yeah.
Not well enough, but yeah.
Corey's got 2 years left.
Okay.
We're not guaranteed his age at all either, Corey. She has a lot of other things that he likes to do, so.
Fair. Yeah, that was the, we sat down and have a conversation about CETA. You know, like, you know, we talked about all that. Yeah. Well, also it's just like, they hadn't been many places either, so it was like, we gotta figure out what to do. Not like they have much intel on y'all.
Just my luck, the bathroom when I was downstairs was closed for cleaning, and now that I'm upstairs, the one upstairs is closed for cleaning.
There's a mountain up there.
Are you joking me?
Just go through there, it's in the hallway.
Oh, looks like we're down a divider now. Maybe the walk was good for my brain or something else I can rationalize. You added this to the one and see?
No, haven't that one?
Do you all have like a podium?
Yeah. Should be...
Right there.
Oh yeah, that's right there. Let me...
Oh good. Simon, can you get it?
We brought podiums, we brought lightsabers.
All the things. All the things. Oh my.
It's right there.
There. It sounds like a coffee percolator.
It's more unclear than anything else. That's true.
There should be.
There are persuasion points. You can lose them very quickly.
I ran this idea for the Shirley where we do speaker points in England and just reseed wins will come first. I feel like
I think the reading of the speech doc while Jared Bader's going for a lot of judges is basically eliminated the concept of clarity.
I actually like, yeah, no, I don't want to
That's why I don't do it.
keep people clear. I feel clear more when I'm reading.
Really? I think you're the exception.
That's right. I'm not pretending that I do it every time.
It's like last night when we were judging, we were in that round 8. Me and you weren't reading it, but I was looking at Monday and he's just scrolling along.
Just not like a dual monitor, you can flow and then scroll.
Nope. Nope.
Negative go track.
Nope. I gotta do it. I gotta be able to understand.
I used to not even be on the email chain, but I finally broke down on that one. Because the debaters now, they're just trained to leave
like
the
the
room
chain
and
there.
rounds over because they think you have all the cards.
Yeah.
So I'd always just be sitting in a room by myself asking for a card and no one there to give
I'll just send it out.
Otherwise, I just forward you the email chain anyway.
So, as long as the debaters know that, everything's fine.
I'll just send it to you then.
Nick is watching
Just
debate
resend
one
it.
seat right now. Isn't that awesome?
Live.
Really? My gosh, I'm jealous.
Okay.
I don't even know. I didn't check.
Uh-huh.
Like,
God damn it. Yeah.
Is this the big closing?
No.
Okay. Oh my god, Ben.
what?
You're acting so distressed.
I am exhausted. I understand everyone in here probably is, but I'm also just bored.
We'll have to change
Well,
that.
hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
We will.
Entertain me. I'm 1 of 5 though, so you should probably entertain everyone else too, just to be fair.
I guess.
All those in favor of letting Ben decide the debate?
Oh, that's
Right,
easy.
right,
All
have
right.
it.
We'll wait for them to say something and then say something.
I didn't disagree with that decision.
What?
So let me decide.
Okay, you said it, yeah. Because I actually didn't.
Yeah, we're in the 1 and 2 territory now.
Okay.
Yeah, having this debate.
Now did everyone get the words?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Yay. We made a speech document. Okay. Blackness everywhere remains a threat to the U.S. In 2005, countries and international organizations began developing military strategies containing the threat posed by black Muslims who dared to fight back against the global exploitation of Africa. Following the collapse of the Somalian government in the early 90s, countries began to see Somalia as an international dumping ground for nuclear waste and pollution, such that during the Indonesian tsunami in 2004, barrels of toxic waste washed on Somalian shores. Somalian rebel pirates, marine abolitionists against anti-black colonialism began to capture the ransom of international vessels in order to restore economic stability and provide life within a neoliberal system that had robbed them of their livelihood. No longer able to fish in the toxic water, Somalians turned to a tangible rebellion against anti-blackness as both a possibility for survival and liberation in a world that saw them as only too poor to die. Western image construction, the Somalian rebel pirate is a continuation of anti-blackness and its integration with Orientalism. Somalians oscillate between the poles, the humanitarian image of the helpless victim and the militaristic criminal visual of the Africanist pirate. Fungibility operates between the switching between these symbols. Failed state discourse surrounding Africa and Somalia in particular describes those nations as infantile, irredeemably unstable, sustaining paternalistic defenses of Western imperialism. That's Simon 12. The African nation state has already failed Africa alive because they're too poor to die. Only criterion to justify Western present destination has failed. Existence shared threat. Somalia comes to fatal by state collapse around the world. Will always be hungry and ravaged where Somalia's future comes colonized West construction of failed present images of starving Somali children remains some of the most recognizable images of poverty assets of third world. The West pornography, third world famine, failed state discourse premise on Eurocentric binders of good and evil, Orientalist gaze of the other incapable, explaining the African economy crisis of West's responsibility for creating its Somali's bodies have become weapons to reaffirm the stability of whiteness. Failed state discourse preserve the U.S. imperial project oriented to the war on terror. The non-West we always live under the threat of failure. The West will always be tasked with saving show the fascist investment, sovereignty, the black body, sovereign historical violence, colonialism experienced by the South Africa has been historicized as always without. And labeling Somalian pirates terrorists is highly racialized. The United States continues to render Somalia a fungible object for their domination, portraying both the starving children in Somalia in contrast to the rebels who are terrorists in order to justify their exploitation. All we can learn from this is Somalia does not have the freedom to self-define, but rather is a fungible object for the United States consumption. For what does it mean to be terroristic? Is it not terroristic to occupy the land and roam the seas that are countries that are not yours, ignoring popular opinion in order to justify your imperial efforts? Is the United States not terroristic for the fact that it kills thousands of black people abroad and at home daily? Leftists confront the very empty nature of the term terrorist, but the very real threats that come when it's attached to bodies. This system can only be rightly described as a war against black people, fought through extreme forms of gratuitous violence, in other words, terror. This is why Somalia's place regarding the war on terror is telling. It says the state does not pursue terrorists for the crimes they may or may not have committed, because a society founded and relying against anti-black terror is a terrifying one to fight back, to refuse to submit to the hopeless negativity. Thus, sign and I affirm the analytic of piracy as a hermeneutic for a maroonage. The role of the bad is surrender to blackness. This grammatical imperative marks not only the possible revolutionary practice, surrendering to blackness means that recognizing anti-blackness structures, both contemporary race relations and the coalitional politics that the negative will probably talk about. Instead of endorsing the fetishization, your role as a judge is to endorse the surrender of demand of blackness. That's Brady and Murillo 14. Black Frescard enunciates the level of the ontological order. Surrender to blackness is a command at the level of foundations of thought, and being themselves with any hope for revolutionary practice must centralize blackness. The unthought question remains: have you truly earned the right to act in solidarity? Anti-blackness has no is a singularity with no equivalent force. We can understand anti-blackness as general to the concept of life, unspeakable force of black death. Coalition politics are fetishized. Fetish denies the necessary recognition of anti-blackness. The coalition's heart. We open up a form between the distinction of fetish and the absolute imperativeness and the imperative. Instead of fetishizing the object, you must surrender to blackness. And we analyze Somali piracy in the context of maroonage or perpetual flight from slavery to force outside of civil society in order to attempt to develop a way to describe the grammar that underlies the United States and its foundational antagonism. That's Jameson 13. Flights of activity, communal, conceptual oneness, created room flashers, habitat of boundary defining democracy, federalism, mortgage two, controlling phenomenon democracy, as boundary fighting for through captivity, maroon philosophy, the real borders, reimagining freedom of supply, reproductivity, points of light, nature, cyphers, falling material subjugation, the birth room, racial capital overshadows racial, seeming racial tone or differences, masculine, black suffering, holding black, female, trauma, black male, frame, death row, mass imprisonment, suffering, for all violence, centered on the public racial rights, and complicated miracles are all blood traceable trails are traceable back to the black nature, focus on the nature of subjugation, sensitive material space, and colonization, scarification of black homes and matrices have no public record. Black matrix have deniability, state and violence, where those years meet Western democracies, manufactured black matrix as disposable through libidinal linguistic material enemy civilians are primary targets to terror against black and female matrices, DNA, police, military, master, mistress, racist, hardworking immigrants, and captives, marines can all be found the bodies of black matrix, politicized mother, transport, and tractors into creation of democracy, and Runic allows for the development of possibilities of black cyborg, which allows us to transcend beyond humanism. That's James 13. The new being is now cyborg and a brutal collective over covert rebel and alive because everyone is mechanized and repelling with the spiritual force of freedom, driving a biological mechanical divine. The duty is one to strive for the realization of the cyborg. The cyborg comes the possibilities of permanent revolution, burden, cemented in more than blood and rational shape by the imagination, memory, longing, and aversion is one cyborg, one mass unified, its own biological mechanical divine formation. Revolutions mark the end of time and space and conventionally understood what happens to the human counterpart of the machine, part of the divine. Their distinctions mark not the end of the world, but the end of humanity. Blackness is no longer is negation of white supremacy maneuvers. Simply no longer human or subhuman flight from the human, and anti-blackness cannot be solved through the political process. Public deliberation structurally cannot include the position of the slave because they're denied personhood by definition. That's Hartman and 9. Concerns about the possibility of practice related to subject formation, slave outside the political, proper, historical, social limits of political must be recognized in order to abide with the needs of the relegated, privatized, non-political, the agency of slave, relegated, non-political, subject removed from public sphere, are firmly outside the space of politics. Slave is neither subject man nor free worker, must go from the narrative of we, the people. And anti-blackness is a global system. Humanitarian and other military and black nations have inevitably reinforced the vulnerability and fungibility of black life such that white organizations are able to avoid responsibility through all legal systems. We must recognize that even though blackness overdetermines identity, their particularities and different experiences that are nonetheless linked through anti-blackness. That's Anderson 15. The world's invested killing every resource linked to global oppression. Black people transcend the borders of the empire. Black life is vulnerable internationally. Soldiers are consistent, perpetuate state violence against black life, but black bodies are their soldiers there to police them. A soldier wreak havoc on the African countries with content development, investment, military policy. Nations experience economic growth that not benefit their populations. In the Congo, the UN launches ever first ever peacekeeping force with combat, many UN concerns about massive human rights violations. Conflict continue to rage on. Black people across the world are vulnerable to rebel government and UN peacekeeper. UN spread clear to Haiti. Outbreak kills thousands of U.S. extraterrestrials that the charter provides with legal immunity, oppression, alienation, disembarrassment come in the name of protection. African immigrants are tormented when native help remove Gaddafi, set up a way of chaos, targeting Libya's black residents, rendered up, brutalized, sometimes murdered, makeshift forces armed by the U.S. to target black Africans. Countries like Kenya, which I renew her relationship with the West, take steps to keep poor Africans at oppression, still fight back even on black countries seen to see the entire world and knows that Africa's wealthy in terms of resources, people, land grabs, development, foreign instrument, and that colonial powers are used to subjugate Africa with every disaster, multiple losses, opportunities. U.S. administration has been extending through the U.S. and Africa throughout many black countries. Military operations taking place within Uganda, Nigeria, and Somalia. Crisis, disaster, war, terrible open opportunities for the U.S. to expand through other larger black international world. Every action comes at a cost of counter-debt, trauma, high, widespread targets black countries heavily, and international movement needed to value the safety of black life and decency. Struggles are so intricately linked. And neoliberalism has radically transformed the law, limiting state activity while organizing social order through governmentality. That's goal number 9. Unruly populations are subject to discipline through the threat of imprisonment. Unwillingness to find through the racial extension subjects to state of exceptional race operates at a different, less obvious register as the technology, population management, racial implication, actively mobilized the mode of security control, competitiveness. The more neoliberal the state, the more race will be immune from the intervention of the relation, state practice via the relation first and extending. So, true relation intervention, limits, forms of control, state can no longer be seen as racially discriminating. The state looks after your interests by encouraging you to look within yourself. And insistence on learning about policy making and government turns university spaces into expert zones of neoliberal logic, colonialism, and modern slavery. The deputization of academic labor in service of policy also gets inward to regulator and engagement. That's Hardy-Month 13. This kind of policy world was emerging over every self-determined individual, the right to make brutal policy in the spot for everyone who is not self-determined. Essentially, slave situation is that these policy people are like nightmares. The ubiquity of policy making, laborers, and the apparatus of police power, everybody's on patrol trying to capture the ones who are trying to get out, especially themselves trying to capture their own fugitivity. That's the first which was policies directed. The university was an avant-garde policy making place where ubiquity policy was being modeled for other realms of the social world that can be centered around which we expert this whole process of problematic policy making. That's why you get extreme neoliberalism in Bush Amendment. There are kinds of viscous drones against the poor, the night practice making policy from everywhere to be fixed against everyone who needs fixing, and the next minute the government is deployed against the poor. There's no hiding in Imagine Leo in liberal institution. Your eyes are the police, or you have to find some other way of being. Okay.
Are Africans black?
Our argument is that the United States codes Africans as fungible through black
Okay.
racial epidermal.
Sure, so the United States does a coding process, but the Somali pirates themselves in Somalia, are they black in the sense?
Well, considering
of
that we don't
Europeans?
know what it means to be black, I find that a hard question to answer. Our argument
You
is
don't
that
know what
black
it
racial
means to be
epidermal
black?
schema overcodes identity processes, so experiences do not shape reality, which is all of the arguments we made about how blackness overdetermines identity. People in Chicago are obviously different than me. There are probably
Okay.
people like a bully who definitely believe in different political
Sure.
practice than me. All of those things are overcoded when we walk outside.
How do you know when something is outside of civil society?
What do you mean?
So
Argument is that-
maroonage outside civil society. What is the barrier between within civil society, outside of civil society?
Well, our argument is anything that requires an antagonism of anti-blackness.
What,
Right.
Could you break that down a little? For
So civil society maintains itself of constitutively excluding black people. So we know what civil society is by maintaining the seeds of what it means to sort of like all of the things that
Okay.
we prove through that.
How-
Reducing blackness to fungible, not being
How do
able
you
to
tell
speak
if
/ have
something-
agency, gratuitous violence, social death, general dishonor, natal alienation, all of those things prove the situation / context of black people's constitutive
Okay.
relationships
How
in
do
the
you
world.
determine whether a situation has that constitutive relationship?
How do you no, that's what I'm trying to explain to you.
Okay.
The James evidence indicates that currently it's impossible to define what freedom looks like because we don't have the answer of what blackness looks like. Maroonage is the
Okay.
ability to refuse to put optimism in existing structures and hope that you gain an affective moment capable of decoupling yourself from
Great.
those structures.
So, refuse to put into existing structures. What constitutes a structure that is existing versus not existing? Because obviously these maroon communities in some way existed.
No.
No, in no
I
way
mean,
did
maroonage
they
has
exist.
existed throughout time. I just don't know what you mean by maroon community.
Okay, I guess that's
maroonage
fine.
is a hermeneutic.
I want to talk about
get
the
to a
Goldberg
community.
card. So the government operates over disciplinary tactics on a micro level, which build up to. It looks like we're doing things for ourselves, and it appears as though we have freedom, but really we're constrained by social relations. How is this commensurate at all with a theory that cites like a structural antagonism as something everything else occurs against?
I don't think that there's a difference between what you're saying. The Goldberg evidence is not what we advocate, but our Goldberg evidence indicates that the law has radically changed. The government
Right.
can't just go around saying
So
Schneiders,
if the law
but
operates
the United
as a
States
series-
and Donald
Okay.
Trump rallies still mean that people mob and kill black
Great.
people
So
and say
if
you're a
the
nigger
law,
monkey. Is
if
our
the
argument.
law operates as a sort of coalescence of micro processes and as like
No, it's not
you know,
micro processes. That's our argument. The law is constitutively defined of what it is not, which is black, unfree, derelict, enslaved.
That is not
Criminality is
well-supported.
marked upon black skin, which means it's not a question of the law itself, but black people constitute the norms for which we can define criminality / not
I think your
criminality.
Goldberg card is not really that. So what does it mean
Well, then
for a
that's-
cyborg to see permanent revolution?
I don't understand what you mean. What?
What does it mean for the cyborg to see permanent revolution?
Right, our argument is that time doesn't pass, it accumulates. We understand that revolutionaries in the past have failed. Our argument is don't be a bitch baby and keep trying.
Just like the 1 and C, one-off case. Let me know when you two have it. Good. Topical acts must affirm the resolution through instrumental defensive action by the United States government. Definition should denote expectation of planned merit heritage. 2K, the will to do something. The United States means federal government, free day, 14, United States, the executive, legislative, and judicial branch of the federal government of the United States revolves compliance with policies in the House and fire prosecution of legislative instrument used for stating policy use of the term result now vote negative versus predictable limits. The resolution poses the question of the is prepared to answer and creates a bounded list of potential acts for us to think about, debate this unique potential to change attitudes and grow critical thinking skills because it forces free round internal deliberation on a focused common ground to make good number. And 3. Differentiation deliberate processes where time level where I said to develop some level of trade liberty people have to want to stand having before the formal discussion we lead or organize but hold up police from something we up there running with these we probably have to we drop the intent for the updating teacher remember we easily retreat that we cannot think we can actually retreat the reasons why that's one of the reasons assessment requires us to call briefs rather than consulting or summary judgments relevant to the predetermined process of crucial for reshaping of attitudes focusing the head on a common topic on a topic writing information inviting people to take part find a strong impetus to internal collective deliberation altering with the way people process information and how they think the educational participating and formally organizing such a way to prompt the devotees after micro process processes might be different. Mass politics and systems story concentrates designs on a single issue agreed by all stakeholders in order to mass politics there is rarely the equivalent kind of ground on which debates are conducted. We think it less an anticipation, attention, knowing moves soon after time our views, and it is discursive setting when they were proved intentionally, and most problems are not clear cut but have complex, unstandard interactions. The app is characterized by shoddy generalizations like government is always bad that prevent us from understanding the nuances of an incredibly important and complex issue, which is the epitome of dogmatism, Cal all and down confusion, and conflict, personal possession, diverse perceptions, fear, installation, and reformulation ideas, and meanings of learning parts of this to divergent ideas cling to the certainty of what's beliefs versus dogmatism, rigidity, and the inability to learn, produce, experience, participation, and debate simulates critical evaluation of the evidence and values underlying one's own position to be effectively true to understand and actively evaluate your host approach everything to intensively into distinct legitimate uses of ideal evaluation and reconstruction and knowledge of beliefs pertaining to the issue. Second, a policy-oriented topic is key. The devil is in the details for true production. Understanding policy technicalities is necessary to guide our response to militarism and colonialism, while they determining what we may and what forces deployments to prioritize and how to react to appropriate legislation are key. Lever 7. As the Iraq War, U.S. outpatient and their fifth year nations, I for Rebuttal, former state hours, major ammo, developed a bill, against time him overdraw the bills of political victory, but the devil's in the details. The politics want to be right, but the actual policy of far cry from what the Iraqis and the U.S. public wants, lies for trade bills is major challenge to the White House, little attention paid to the actual content of the bills of withdrawal combat troops is not well defined. Legislation measures are a weak mandate for a bill that will continue to do with military presence and occupation generate the same problem. Neither side of this may seem to understand the value of the other, nor the outcome actually increase the strength of the anti-war movement having the other large deficiencies in the bill provides leverage for future concessions in a way to end the war sooner. The movement must realize that Congress is not compromised of peace next, but also the political compromises will also be with pressure when needed. And the process when the Vietnam War, over 30 votes were taking public pressure was the key to moving legislation and changing the lawmaker position. Understanding the particularities of government narratives around military mentions or policy debate is necessary to build skills, awareness, and connections that are key to meaningfully work towards social justice domestically and abroad. Summary 4. The globalization of capital driving present expansion produces surplus population, the global economic recession as undermined traditional survival strategy, global capitals, and deeply linking U.S. and now military intervention. What does this mean for our research and practice as scholars and activists? Much more work needs to be done to unravel the complex interaction and actions between mass incarceration, military, and the global economy. Its activists on the part of our priority should be to make connection with radical and social movements regularly by opportunity for sharing strategies. Such actors like prevent the spread of super just cross-fertilization will look for actors to address further issues that are not always made visible. Issue-based campaigns now states that globalization might encourage abolitionist security or anti-capitalist economic models of pre-Brexit rule without prisons and an effective challenge to the interlocking system of militarism, incarceration, and globalization demands the establishment of broad-based cross-military coalition movement to abolish prisons can learn from the successive movements in the global southeast, develop a sophisticated intersectional analysis of globalization, imperialism, and militarism, as well as race, gender, class, and nation. These pay attention to issues identity while maintaining radical analysis of it on the global capitalism. Radical abolitionists have a great deal to add to the global movement against imperialism and the global capitalism. And the Athalone meaningless focus on creating spaces as communicative capitalism thrive on individuated communication focus to be provides the opportunity to challenge power channel reviewing the intent. The left take reference to the NDT, the circulation ideas will construct collectivities. This was a leftover retreat from the state of creation of collective action radicals appears to be based less on change in world than on the translation of altruistic identity and non-strategic, non-historical translation of a protest left to busy writing alternative voices and bases of forms to think about engaging mass society and organize attempts of focus on giving voice and giving voice and spaces to reproduce the domination of capitalism where there is no shared space of debate and liberation of messages without the responsibility to develop and defend positions and no external accountability to capitalism is held to thrive on this individuated framework which gives the impression of a shared discourse where belief in reality, but the neoliberal framework is continuing unopposed. Case. Anti-blackness is a political project, not a fait accompli. All human systems are necessarily changeable. They take too narrow a view of history and marginalized resistance empowerment strategies are key. Gordon 15. One problem we look at humans in terms of rigid political systems is that we try to model how we work based on generalizations. We put a serious problem to the political Wilderson, for instance. There was a discussion of people build it on one of my earlier books. It was an indefinite article in anti-black world. The world is different from the anti-black world. Conflict of racism create a world that would be completely anti-black. Although it is a project, it's not a fait accompli. People don't understand how recent this phenomenon is. A lot of the people talking about race don't know the history of how race is connected to theonatural. For instance, Andalusia, and that pushing out of the Moors, the history of our race connected to Christianity was formed. People don't understand from the standpoint of species 220,000 years old. What the hell is 500 years? We create a false model for how we study those last 500 years. We studied 500 years if people who have been dominated have not been resisting the problem in formation of pessimism and optimism. They are both based on a prior knowledge, but human beings don't have prior knowledge. What are we need to have guarantees for us to act and understand. In all political action, it's not about you, it's about what you are doing for a world you may not even be able to understand. People have done it before. There were people who fought anti-colonial struggles. This is where we were developing political icons, and we forget the systems we are talking about are human systems. They are not systems in which they will talk in laws of physics. A human system can only exist by human action maintain them, which means every human system is incomplete. Every human is by definition incomplete. Where you can go this way or another way. The system is not actually closed. Many people give up on levels in which people build alternative ways to imagine global future, but no one breaks up an insight. You don't need to understand failure differently. Failure, second nature, a new kind of relation. You'll hear the slave world fail. That is not natural history. Every single instance there was a slave revolt with the women's movement, mostly women who cared about liberation. We are able to look at the world differently because women fought. It's not that they said treat me better. They got up and went out every instance of anyone doing activism really worked. reports there where people make us they think that just because in the past they were overcome moments that they don't realize really change conditions. They don't identify them so much with the fault because they had to be new was right. It's not about you, it's about subsequent generations. Mark the card. Their account of the continuous nature of the anti-blackness ignores differences and how it operates over time. Johnson 2-3 interracial organization fund to secure black freedom in the right justice party, lower property taxes, starting to expand public service and remove the whole black struggle to expand the rights of civil rights together, public creating concrete social justice and temporary forms of inequality, making results the general proceeds and justice work class in different ways. The descriptive status of life in the late 19th century were not contemporary impressions are not propelled by the interests of Southern planters. We continue to research on model of analysis the face of a change world blackness is still day working of being anti-black racism and all the principal determinant of material conditions for making African Americans the most impoverished or hyper with liberal anti-racist centralized lives of most excluded segments of workers only historical moments when popular movements organized around common private movements have society more short greater equality anti-racist levels while slightly historical there's significant class differences and rates of incarceration disprove their ontological totalization of what and 10 expansion distinction of police courts and the prisons that define retarded first by class second by race and criminal targeting joint incarceration of lower class African American men while leaving middle and upper class African Americans untouched class always in the first shelter selection for incarceration the well will become focused on race crime and punishment has dominated the actions of the prison movement has obliterated the fact that inmates are first and foremost what people consider the clientele in the nation still clientele drawn overwhelmingly for the lower and working class fewer than half of inmates held a full-time job at the time of Reagan and 2/3 issues from consoles only 13% of post-secondary education clients of America's jails suffer from acute material and security cultural deprivation and social development include disproportionate numbers of homeless and mentally ill the alcohol and drug addicted and the severely hanky airways second words of criminal arrests were present with African Americans also the high school the homeless triple life education serving for African American men with some college education do reduce from 6% to 5% in the media public around the arrest of dates in summer 2009 has hidden the fact that middle upper class African Americans are better off under the present penal regime than they were 30 years ago. African American men were 8 times more likely to sojourn behind bars than European American men with likelihood probability of shorting time to prison for African American males who did not complete their secondary education is 12 times after African American males who went to college to the fact that these ratios were considerably lower 2 decades ago for with African Americans and European Americans confirms that a large imprisonment has tried very selectively by class instead of race anti-blackness is contingent on legal reforms contingent only when all 13 and system of racism and political power and agency of people of color virtually disappear by racism and difficult to understand how racial relation and will record to the past where would ever take place systematic racism like the boring Star Trek highline and to some ways all touches race and race which don't be distinguished race as realness consequences race and racism do not distinguish because by domination meaning his resistance and independent natural racial creation is fundamentally political racial creation proceeds the project which defined what we see in our account race is totally shaped by white racial people of color power the production of racial meaning racism both modern history of power slavery and genocide the government with the resistance this is where race comes from the drive to rule the imperative to resist who is why the question of whether there were any possible dimensions of why that ending or whether it was purely negative quality is a lived and lived out now part of social identity racism is more than racism it is a social fact race identities are not defined solely by antagonism and
I think you should read the other one.
Hospital desegregation is an example of tactical victories, causing huge improvements over 15. Medicare appears to world less yet in the vast scope and immediacy of impact by threatening to withhold federal funding pending household effectiveness of racial discrimination, Medicare forced desegregation hospital, and virtually evident no one noticed both forecast of Medicare and Medicaid healthcare was heavily segregated hospitals, self-compliant with laws and advice of hospitals there were lots of black communities that had basically no access to hospitals and could have maternal mortality rates were usually different from blacks and whites in the north. Black physicians couldn't get practice hospitals on below ones of Medicare hospitals with the integrated progress system. As a later program set up Johnson Office of Equal Health Opportunity very beneath layers of democracy which starts with certified hospitals and get federal funding based on whether the sorority or not guard or recognizing the normative class society to call in as much staff as necessary. That card is stopped at as much staff as necessary, which is a lot.
Just a clarification, you only read like one, the first Omi and not
Yes.
Okay. I guess, what does your model of debate / discussing a topical action do for, like, let's say the specific black people in the community?
Sure. Well, it allows for people in the community to gain skills from a discussion of technical policy considerations that allow for them to effectively challenge modes of governmentality.
Okay, so debating about military presence allows for considering it's like me, Corinne, Charles, I think that's everybody left. I guess, what does it do for us? Since like debate is about to end, the topic's about to end, I'm the only black woman left. I guess, what does your model of debate do for the intimate violence expressed towards black women?
Sure, because the discussion of things like cost, jurisdiction, implementational concerns.
No, I want to know like this discussion. If I were to lose this debate, I would no longer be able to debate, right? I would no longer be able to get or sustain the education.
There are sophomore quarters of NDT. You got plenty of time.
So debating this topic isn't necessary. It's about debating the process.
You
just indicated, no, I said militarism / military presence. You would like to get to debate in the future.
Has foreclosed what could have been a discussion of the policy technicalities of militarism. We have said that is a bad thing because it undermines the capacity of black people to resist those institutions.
It's already happened, so what do we do in those situations?
We think it's valuable to create a model of debate that encourages debaters to engage in issues of policy technicalities.
Okay, so it's not about this debate, it's about the model of debate in which you promote.
Mimi, is that accurate? I think so. Yeah,
Huh?
both.
The model of debate. So this debate sets a precedent for what? Because you've indicated that it sets a precedent for in the future me to talk about like topical plans.
We think a more productive model of debate is one that causes debaters to deal with the policy technicalities, because yes, government and society are structured against black people, but that is a reason why it is especially important for those people who are targeted by modes of governmentality to understand the intricacies
So
of
debate.
those
So
modes of
is
power as
defending
a
it
means of
necessary
resisting
to
against them.
understand it? Defending it is necessary to understand it.
We would contest your use of the term defending per se, but we think that arguing on behalf of the resolution
How do you not
teaches
wait?
you
What,
to understand.
defending what? If I defend that the government is doing something bad, I obviously have to defend a topical plan, right?
You would have to argue that the benefits of a topical plan outweigh the costs.
Okay,
We think defend carries some connotations like personal beliefs,
Okay,
etc.
thanks, Wimsett.
Okay.
I'm curious about
You're
what you
welcome,
mean when
Kim.
you say dogmatism.
Dogmatism, we think that an understanding of things like anti-blackness is always ontological, or the government can never be productive, flattens the nuances of an incredibly complex
Do you
issue.
not find it overly ironic that you understand dogmatism in a way that if we do not believe in the government, we are being dogmatic? If
You
we
don't
do
have
not
to
believe
believe in
that the
the government.
government can create policy,
It's not about dogmatism over the government, it's about dogmatism over the resolution.
okay, dogmatism over the resolution.
Yes.
You've
Yeah, so
indicated
it's not
the
debates on the
resolutionary
government,
it's not a
it's
question of
debates.
military presence, as you've indicated, because the only thing I could get would be from debating the topic in the future. So it's a question of the nitty-gritty policy debates in which you would like to probably defend, right? In the future. This abstract idea of like policy/policy debating.
Yes, we think those are productive.
Sounds great.
Nothing good. Nothing's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
come on.
Always fixes it. Alright, so orders, case, framework. Alright, anyone not ready? Cool. Anti-blackness has gone global, targeting a Somali rebel prices to reification of anti-blackness and trust to the treatment of black people around the world. Myths about the hypersexualized black Muslim are used as a form of identity making for identity making for whiteness and a good versus evil dialectic that is seen. The piracy can be used as an analytic for examining used military policy that can be hermeneutic to connect the experience of black people globally based on a common experience of suffering due to anti-blackness. The project of mapping the global contours is valuable for providing the possibility of fugitive politics for black life. The black cyborg is one instance of this in which black people can surpass humanity, connect with black life and death that can open the opportunity for a permanent revolution. Black women must come first. The liberal economy and the ways neoliberalism has transformed the law means that the focus needs to be on the liberal economy, or racial rape is invariably folded into racial capital. Now the role of the ballot is to surrender yourself to blackness. They do not provide an alternative role of the ballot, so I'm pretty sure you can fall after any hope of revolutionary praxis must centralize blackness as a condition of impossibility for the world. Now they have double turned themselves and they should lose. The Gordon evidence is an AF card. He says to buck up and realize that we are fighting the same fight throughout time and that revolutions accumulate, which is exactly what Q was talking about at the end of 1AC Cross-X. Gordon indicates that the progress that black people have accomplished was through slaves freeing themselves. That is the you should have to look me in the eye after this debate and tell me that any policy action that the neg can refer to was an instance of slaves freeing themselves, when I'm pretty sure the only instances of progress that they can point to are instances in which black people operated outside of the political until the government cooperated with them.
Was forced to compromise.
Yeah, was forced to compromise. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. That is, yeah. Now, he also turns framework because he also said that people who don't act with certainty of the results are cowards. So you should be willing to take the leap and vote out to try and burn down the base so that we can rebuild from the ashes. Johnson, anti-blackness is ontological. Our argument isn't that change can't happen, but the very opposite. Slavery has evolved from literal shackles to sharecropping, Jim Crow, lynch law, segregation, the prison-industrial complex, etc., etc. Focus on the shift, but that focusing on the shifting of methods and the specific technologies rather than whether black people are ontologically situated differently glazes over the reality of how more black people are shot today than during Jim Crow. Now, the quant evidence, class does not disprove anti-blackness. The grid of sociality doesn't change how Trayvon and how black Harvard professor are still both open to gratuitous violence. Obviously, there are different levels on which violence can be given to on the individual level to black people.
On the sociological register.
Yeah, sociological register, but recent studies of comparing incarceration rates of black and white people on an economic scale showed that even rich black people are still in prison far more than poor whites. Now, the only non-evidence ahistorical and doesn't make a definitive claim about how small instances of change have changed, how black people still struggle to survive within the world, even if Q can drink at the same water fountain as me or occupy the same hospital, which the Sternberg card talks about. Gave white people more influence over black pathology and hasn't changed how black people are still labeled with illness far more than non-black people. It literally gave white people access to Henrietta Lax's cells, which they stole from her, and that continually reproduced throughout time to advance science. Now, framework. Counterinterpretation. The app should have a holistic interpretation of the resolution, which means that we should consider the possibility and the conditions of impossibility that make the resolution possible. Debating the terms of military presence is fundamentally unethical because it prevents us from interrogating the question of should the USFG exist. Fairness, education, and contestation are not impact, but rather internal links to preserving institutions. This possession has Marxists stress the coherence of their debate fantasy. As such, you should vote affirmative to betray whiteness and surrender yourself to blackness. Wilderson in 8. The claim of balance may replay foreclosed upon antagonist to harden in America itself is racist and illegitimate. White people are guilty until proven innocent of reproducing concepts like fairness, balance, standards, norms of wanting stability and reform. The question: how can you maintain the maximum amount of order with the minimum change while having the best of all possible intention of revolution over institutional reform, passive and faith that keep real and necessary antagonism because white people love their institution. Every black and brown body that doesn't love the things you love is the threat to your love for each other, the threat to your fantasy. State passive revolution incorporating black bodies to the term of the debate, frustrating debates with the reproduce the institution. Institution reproduces America. America is always and everywhere. But I think this term is never on the table. Product that team players will incorporate color phrase and will fold the baritone of the debates to ensure discussions over white entitlement when white entitlement is an odious idea. Whites are entitled to betray other whites, nothing else. Now, when they say topicality, they treat us as piracy. The only way to challenge the traditional structure of debate is to more ruin ourselves from the top. topic, maroonage is a refusal to play by the rules of the game. The Somali pirate is defined as an outsider because they're a unique threat to the capitalist order of property ownership and international economic exchange. Not defending the resolution is the only way to affirm maroonage. All of their framework arguments are a reenactment of you should lose because you didn't play by the rules. That's the same logic that allows troops to murder pirates because they think that they do not play by the rules of the economic order. Every time that they say we make the game unfair, etc., that is the same thing said against the pirate. Now several dissents to their interpretation. First is Knight Rider's insistence on learning about policymaking and governance turns university spaces into export zones of neoliberal logic, colonialism, and modern slavery. Makes us focus more on who is ahead in the presidential debate rather than who will actually be good for black people. They Knight Ride to make sure that we are focused on the right subject while ignoring how that subject glazes over everyday violence. That is Harney and Moten. Now second is governmentality. Neoliberalism has transformed the way in which the state engages in anti-blackness. Rather, the libidinal economy has become the key side of anti-blackness. Focus on the law and particular legislation is a red herring because the U.S. is no longer operate with the openly racist politics, but rather uses empty signifiers like thug, criminal, etc. to signify blackness. That is Goldberg. Third is deliberation. Cross-supply Harvard, the political, and who can access it is based on the exclusion of what it is not slave and free. The agency of the enslaved is always invariably relegated to the non-political because there are limits to what the government can do for black life. Those subjects removed from the public sphere are also forming outside the space of politics. Fourth is the exclusion dissent. You should ask yourself what debate would look like if people only read topical plans and defended instrumental action. We already know it would look like the 1970s where there were only a few black people and there was a literal hub of white supremacy. Black women are leaving the activity because of the insistence on topical plans, but only our model of debate can remedy that. Q's presence in quarters as the first black woman since 2004 is meaningful in providing a symbol of hope for those who feel alienated because of a white supremacist and anti-black culture that exists within this community. Now, no topical version of the app. This is no question of could we defend the resolution, but rather what does that do for debate? Claims that their version of debate could lead to a nuanced discussion of anti-blackness are fundamentally and empirically disproven because we read a plan text for the entirety of the year minus a couple months back, but nobody defended any complex relationship to anti-blackness. First, it also doesn't work because it reduces Somalia to an advantage rather than the focus, which doesn't allow us to examine the specificity of anti-blackness on Somalian pirates. Pirates, and second, focus on the political process subsumes sentiment violence into the material, such that more devious libidinal linguistic violence is obscured into the everyday private sphere. That is James. Now, predictable norms of debate serve to undermine cultural and social education in return for a fair contest. Warner in 3. Students public gender, social, and economic composition policy debate privilege groups in the essence of why and how people play the game, rules and procedure created by those carrying that privilege and fair contest given an absolute priority justifies ignoring attempts to achieve other game objectives. Now, dogmatism. It's a dogmatic to say that the government can be good and cross-ex is pretty evident on this question when Q asks, what do we have to do when they say it's just about reading a topical plan of action or instrumentally defending what the USFG can do. It's not even about discussing military presence, which means that they don't access any of their educational claims. So when they say that learning about the different nuances in the military is good, especially when we do not obfuscate that the F is obviously talking about different instances of U.S. military presence in Somalia, i.e. counter-piracy operations, but also it also means that is the definition of goalposting, that they're shifting the interpretation into always exclude us, that they pick and choose which parts of the resolution they need us to that they need us to affirm rather than the whole resolution, which we've indicated is a more educational, better way to understand the resolution. Now, the negative framework argument is black reformism, add black women, and so they seek to integrate us into the traditional model of racist debate by saying we can run a topical version of the add black reformism only first to further intention with systemic racism and anti-blackness. Hudson and 14. There was a move toward electoral politics by the black push, whether more concerned with eliminating illegal barriers to integration, black radicalism, especially reforms in black politics, near multicultural diversity, because male reform became the dominant goal of the country's first black president, embracing many policies that harm African people domestically. In Barack Obama, the Democrats are held up as anti-racist vanguards, even as they implement policies that hurt the black community. This is no accident, it's an inevitable consequence of the repression of black radicalism. The assimilation of black political leaders have led to confuse black representation with black liberation that makes systemic racism harder to challenge, and black radicalism rejects reformist efforts to integrate the black body into structures of systemic racism. Hudson in 14. Marginalization of black radicalism made on a conversation about race difficulty and reforming and improving or integrating the racist power system, not enough for black radical because the system is irredeemably rotten at its core. And the role of the ballot is to surrender to blackness, that not a future model of debate. Yeah, they don't provide an alternative role of the ballot, which means that if their interpretation does not lead to you surrendering yourself to blackness, that means that you automatically default at.
Ready?
Yep.
You map global anti-blackness, then what?
Okay, so I guess there are like two parts to the affirmative. So we understand that tracing the contours of anti-blackness, different technologies, etc., is valuable, and that understanding how anti-blackness operates is essential for creating maroon communities that
Okay,
Shane
what's
says
the
is
link though between that understanding and the formation of the communities? How do you get from point A to point B?
Okay, so, so they're connected, right? So the reason that we understand why piracy is operating in Somalia is because we need to understand that that's another instantiation of the exportation of anti-blackness onto that community, and that therefore piracy exists because it's an example of different types of maroonage.
Okay,
Maroonage is
but what's the
maroonage is
tie of like
maroonage,
the
but there are different
scholarship? Because if
instantiations of
piracy
it.
exists and that is a material reality, what does the mapping
Right,
of
right.
how that relates to
I guess
domestic
that's
and
like the
global
continuation
anti-blackness
of what's happening.
sport
So
activities?
in order to understand that piracy is an instance of maroonage, you also have to understand that it's a contestation of anti-blackness, right? So you need to understand the different ways in which black people have contested anti-blackness throughout the world, that even though they don't look exactly the same, like obviously piracy is very specific to Somalia, that it's still an instantiation of anti-blackness that operates
Okay,
throughout
it
the
seems
world.
like you're just saying this is a way of understanding events as opposed to causing
No.
them.
I
have
think
actually
you
another
misunderstand
question
that,
though.
like,
How do maroon communities
understanding.
change the examples of violence that you listed, such as taking cells away from Henrietta Lacks or the violence at Trump rallies?
Sorry, what?
How do maroon communities resist the structures of things like seizure of Henrietta Lacks's cells
Do you mind
or
if I answer this?
Trump
yeah,
rallies,
go ahead.
etc.?
So our argument is that we can't. So our argument about time, futurity, and the system of anti-blackness not being good, resonate your argument that we can't change the way that anti-blackness structures itself within civil society. The affirmative says that that's why we need to create maroon communities capable of creating a grammar to explain black suffering, which is what Sign is saying about me being here. It's not a representation that debate is getting better, will be good ever, ever, ever. It's
Okay.
not a question of diversity meaning something.
But what
my
exactly
skin
does
represents
that
and
presence, what
translates
does
to black
that
communities.
community do to deal with these overwhelming structures of racial violence?
What does what community?
How do maroon communities resolve those issues when both teams agree that an overarching structure of anti-blackness is violent and would take action
No, but I don't think
to
both teams
combat and
agree.
target
I think
those
that
maroon
evidence you
communities?
have read mean that you do not think that anti-blackness is constitutive.
Okay, but
All
can
of
you
your
answer the
arguments-
question though? How do those maroon communities exist, prevent attempts at encroachment and violence that are committed against them?
No, we can't.
Like,
Yeah, the point is that
So then why affirm?
anti-blackness is overcoming, that it can't and shouldn't be contested through legal institutions like what you indicate through all of your like Omi and Winon cards, your framework argument, etc.
well, I'm
that it
asking how
can't
you
be
solve it, not
contested.
about the law right now.
No,
Like,
You've made the claim that you can solve for particular instantiations of anti-blackness. We have not. We've said that anti-blackness exists everywhere and anywhere, and that rather than investing faith within the political process that can do nothing to resolve anti-blackness, we should divest that hope, engage in maroon communities outside of those institutions.
Okay, we'll take a break.
That's what they all say.
I've done that one before.
Go for
5
it.
minutes later.
Actually, it is a little bit longer. I don't have it written out as an overview, but it isn't a direct answer to the first argument they have made. Does that make you all feel better?
No.
Whatever.
First topic.
Okay. Everybody's good? Awesome. Our interpretation is that topical affirmatives must affirm resolution through hypothesizing action by the United States, which means the act must identify military presence that should be removed and then imagine the consequences if that were to occur. The first impact is topic education, forcing a depth of mutually prepared debate over reducing military presence is necessary to combat a range of social justice concerns, from militarization to the expansion of prisons. There are material forms of violence beyond those that the act addresses that are pressing. The first internal link is detailed debate. Military presence is not yes, no. There are technical considerations like definitions. What presence exactly are leaders reducing? Conditions for aid. Will the U.S. help repair institutions is it that it has disrupted, and when? And political compromises, which are vitally important skills for anyone interested in reducing militarism through any means, which means that activists have to point out deficiencies in legislation for public awareness and to force the concessions later. We have empirical evidence in the context of Vietnam and Iraq, which you should prove over theoretical jargon, which is lever. Look, the devil is in the details, Jared. Their evidence indicates the law is always reconstituting itself, and it may say it's doing one thing, but in fact doing something else, which is exactly why we need to know about it. Now, their first argument is about how they are a holistic system, but debatability is a prerequisite to any benefit we get from being here. We took the time to come to this freaking tournament all the way in Binghamton because we have an abiding belief in the utility of coming together to engage each other's ideas. The debate is not their act versus framework, but their vision of debate versus ours. If they are able to constitute a holistic vision of the topic, whatever that could possibly mean, and just discuss one area of it, a social relation that is involved in an area of massive portions of the world, there is zero limit of the things they could talk about because they are never tied down. They also have a variety of different analytic windows that could be used to describe any of these. It could be a gender lens, a black matrix lens, a pure Wilderson lens, etc., all of which demonstrates that it's impossible to have stable negative ground. You should ask yourself what the role of the negative is under their interpretation when they can read a different role of the ballot every debate. Now, predictability is necessary to making the AF a site of equitable contestation, for which there are two impacts. First, productive debates. Being prepared to discuss the AF is key to making more than just a lecture about the black matrix, Wilderson, and Somalia. A lack of predictability undermines the utility of their observations, since participatory debate is much better at changing minds and teaching us to understand issues. Engaging the material through rigorous debate is a better way to understand the reasoning behind arguments and is necessary to applying what we learned later, which is Gooden and Niemeyer. Predictability is a prior question. The AF uses their evidence to impact turn framework, but for us to answer the impact turns, we need to be able to predict it in the first place, which means that after the debate, you cannot be sure whether the AF is good or bad, or their claims are true or false. Now, second is intellectual growth. This debate alone is meaningless, but every debate is a tiny test of your beliefs over an iterative process. At the end of the resolution, you have ideas you didn't at the beginning because of all the preparation you've done. If you do not know what the AF is going to do, debate is 50% less useful, like going to half as many tournaments for the same cost of your time, money, friends, family. But researching potential affirmatives creates a more complete view of the world based on a multitude of voices and a common set of issues, allows us to compare large bodies of literature within debates, which promotes information processing and teaches us standards through which to evaluate competing claims and evidence. Here is a framing. We cannot read dissents and solvency arguments if they do not defend an imagination of government action. All we get are impact turn debates which favor the affirmative, especially in the context of advocating against oppression. Since they do not have a plain text, competition is incredibly difficult, so it would not be possible to read even another analytic, because that would not be offense. Now they make a claim about shifting goalposts. We have read the same interpretation all year. A holistic interpretation of the resolution, in fact, means all parts that are defined by our evidence. They do not have any counter definitions, which means that only ours is not, in fact, arbitrary, because it is based on a group of literature. Now they say we prevent a discussion of whether the U.S. should exist, but this thesis relies on a claim of complete opposition between the state and the possibility of victory for black people that will largely be answered in the 1NR, but it's infinitely regressive. There is no way of knowing. We can move on to step 2 of determining the value of military presence, because you cannot tell when those conditions arrive. Second is that structures that make debate in the world inhospitable are a reflection of broader society. If we win the training we develop as part of policy debate, creates tools needed to attack those, and the AF does not. It means the neg is more likely to achieve the conditions for step 2 than the F. They make an argument about maroonage, but the maroonage group in their James evidence signed an unfair treaty to create legal and economic conditions that isolate maroonage. They became one of the largest groups of slave catchers in Jamaica, which is not to say their strategy inherently fails or that they are not smart enough advocates, but instead that we need a complex strategy to deal with the modes of ever more complex resistance to violence. The maroon camp cannot just be a defensive pulling away, but in fact needs to be an active beating back of pervasive anti-blackness that occurs as a result of material policy processes. Barrett in 77, the treaty brought an end to the hostilities between the planters and the fighting maroons. It made them a free people with their own lands. The treaty reduced the fighting maroons servants to an unpaid army of planters and a permanent police force. Every bid for freedom was by the slaves was successfully crushed by the Maroons. The Maroons far outdid the British militia who depended on them to do their dirty work. Lulled into complacency, the Maroons went about their business. Now, the analytic creation is insufficient. Frame the debate through the failure of communicative capitalism. The app is emblematic of the left's failure to move their politics beyond words. Prefer a form of education directed towards material action as opposed to an analytic that challenges oppression now. Examples could include legal interventions like hot yell in front of SCOTUS, political interventions like campaigning for prison abolition, or public interventions like outreach and protest. Their form of knowledge production for its own sake blocks universalizing change in favor of us each endlessly circulating information about our personal oppression and patting ourselves on the back. It removes their responsibility to develop their positions in the face of criticism, so you should prefer political struggle with concrete aims. Now, they make an argument about how we are like the people who kill pirates. This is not analogous at all. Setting the parameters for competitive game versus killing pirates is demonstrative of their analytic lacking any real value because they are obviously incredibly different. One has a much more violent material implication than the other. Now, they make an argument about universities being bad. This debate is a process, not a product, which is a framing that takes out much of their offense, even if the apps that we would force them to read are imperfect or lead to bad policy that is irrelevant because it creates the tools that can be used to later create good policy. This card also is just about how the university has become a policy shop. That is not true. We allow for a test of imaginative action. There's not a meaningful difference in this card between developing an analytic within the university space like they do and contesting different policy aims like we do. It's also not that university space is conventionally understood because there isn't things like tenure politics, the same amount of barriers to entry, etc. Now they make an argument about governmentality. For our interpretation solves their offense framework is an additive requirement, not a subtractive requirement. You can advance critical reasons for supporting the app, but they need to be credited as advantages, not advocacies in and of themselves. There are ways under our interpretation to discuss the same issue. The 1AC has done the part of the identification of a problem. It talks about Western construction of Somali terrorism and says that should change. They just need to do the next step of imagining that change were to occur. It's a lot easier to say something is fucked up than to say what we actually need to do to fix it. But they could say our presence has been justified by those imaginaries, or refusal helps undermine it. You could say the state would circumvent withdrawal and use that as a demonstration of the failure of the state, but say that movements coalesce around that. You can talk about how South Korean presence was justified through analogy to blackness, etc. But even if these do not resolve larger anti-blackness, that is a feature, not a bug of our interpretation. It demonstrates the availability of neg ground. That's the process, not product argument. There is no way in 2 hours we come to an ultimate conclusion to massive societal problems like anti-blackness, but we can develop the skills to deal with it. Now, the governmentality argument, yes, the law is constantly constructed. This does not mean it cannot be used for productive purposes. It just means we can stay on top of it. The examples in the 1R will demonstrate that the law can be used for beneficial aims, even if it is working around it. Also, this card is about the influence of the economy and the political economy in terms of government decision making, which undermines their thesis about pervasive anti-blackness. They make the deliberation exclusion argument that was all above. They say it's exclusion. No, well, the topical version of the affirmative demonstrates that is not necessarily the case, and you all read a plan before, so I'm not sure about how you make the claim that black people don't do debate because of having a plan, which seems ludicrous to me. Now, they say that they are a form of hope because Q would get further. This is the worst reduction of identity politics, at least in debates over what would be more hopeful and meaningful, a disabled person or a black person, etc. This type of politics is meaningless and trades off directly with material forms of change, which is the Chandler card. Also, winning is not necessary to value. Losing debates, you learn a lot, and their model is impoverished, but ours suggests that there is massive value in the process of debate itself. Now, they say there's no topical version of the app because people don't defend the complexities. This was above, but we had a 6 strategy against your topical app that did in fact interact with much of your offense. It's only, and obviously people do not have perfect strategies, etc., but it's only a question of the comparative. They have worse strategies when they are unable to prepare, which means they get less in-depth, and the conversations rush to extremes of anti-blackness versus capitalism, for example, instead of solvency debates, which are actually useful for developing policy. They say rules under fair contest. This card does not link. It's not fairness for its own sake, but instead a structure of productive debate that can lead us to more skill building in general. The dogma argument links way more to them than it does to us because they have foreclosed the possibility of beneficial action through the government or through reducing military presence, which are incredibly complex, which means that they are not able to integrate the advantages from a government-centric policy. Instead, on the government-centric policy, obviously the plan is inherent. The plan always talks about military presence. This argument that you don't talk about military presence under interpretation is BS.
Alright, good?
Yeah.
Okay, so, BLM for Ferguson, etc. I asked you this question before, so I hope you have a better answer now. When black people protested the government, they were met with violence. So why should they continue to do that and take the risk their lives for some small hope of progress?
A couple things. First is that there are a multitude of different fronts and different people, etc., but all of them need to know how the government acts and what it does and what violence it perpetrates.
Okay, how does the AF obfuscate learning about the government?
Because it does not discuss the policy processes, which our evidence says are the ways that they perpetuate and justify that action.
I don't think that's not
and
learning
also,
about the government, but that's okay. Let's go back to my original
Well, we have
question
an
again.
argument
Why
about
should black
particular
people
way of
continue
learning
to
about
take the risk and put faith and put demands on the government
Look,
when they are empirically met with violence?
I think this reflects a fundamental misunderstanding. Zero part of our argument is that all change happens politically. Zero part of our argument is that black people should try political change. The entirety of our argument is that everybody, state and extra
how is
state,
forcing
ought to
black
understand.
people to discuss whether change in the governmental policies can be good, not forcing black people to put change within the political?
Okay, so this is the process versus product argument, as well as unique on a negative action topic. When you say the government should not be in Somalia or have piracy missions in Somalia, that is also a claim of the 1AC. It is not defending a larger state
I don't think
apparatus
you're
or saying
answering the question.
change is
but
valuable
that's
within the
fine.
political.
We'll move on. What was your SIG strategy against our topical AF?
I'm trying to think. It might be useful against someone else later in the tournament, but I will, after the tournament, pledge here to show you the strategy,
Okay.
which is sick.
Alright, so I guess in the middle of your speech, you said, like, even if your interpretation always leads to bad policies, that can create some good policies. I'm wondering how, because it seems like that's like, I just found out 999 ways not to make a light bulb.
Okay, so that's the process argument. In 2 hours, in a debate in a competitive setting with time limits, you are never going to come to the perfect resolution of an analytic or a policy, etc. All you can do are test out different things. So it's valuable to learn heuristics by which we can
under
compare
your model
policies.
the policies are always bad, how does that create good policies?
We know what not to do, and we know what elements. I would
Right,
argue
exactly.
that very few
999
policies
ways
are
how
all
not to
good.
make a light bulb.
Yeah,
How
I
do
would
you make the
argue
light bulb?
that very few policies are all good or all bad, and understanding those nuances are incredibly important.
Okay.
Wait, important for what?
Important for productive.
Oh yeah,
Change.
I guess that leads me to my next question then. What is productivity?
Yeah, so obviously it's not like making more money inherently. Our argument is that there is the potential to have material improvements in people's lives, and that is productive.
Okay, so material improvements in people's lives equals productivity. Okay, then what determines whether debate equals productivity?
Debate, well, whether it leads to tools to develop material improvement for people's lives.
I've sent the doc. It will be case.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Oh, take a second, prep. Michael, do you have time to read this?
Yeah, I can do that.
Stop, prep. We probably have about 7 left.
Amendment. Topicality. Case.
You can do this one case if you want.
I'm going to do it on top.
Okay.
Can you move your computer right here?
Yeah.
Gotta go fast.
Okay, Sonic.
One of these days. Alright, do you two have them?
Yeah.
Okay. The rule of ballot, no explanation of what this means, leads to all arbitrariness. It has an unwise predictability just because whatever the app said, like only RF is topical, their rule of ballot fails to set up good debate. You can't decide when somebody has best burned down debate. Our rule of ballot is that you should vote for the team who presents the most productive method of debate. We should have a more realistic exception what happens in a single round. There are a really limited number of people with a limited amount of power. The rule of debate should be to gain the skills needed to combat institutional oppression. Every campaign, these different parts, they mistakenly play the laboratory of ideas. Part with the doing stuff part means the better methods of debate answer the question of who has crafted an approach that can address all sorts of oppression. And only learning about institutional decision making is able to address the larger structures which marginalize black women and contribute to the black which means that we access their interpretation better. Case. Anti-blackness is political. The very fact that its genesis was in the Middle Passage shows that material conditions gave rise to seemingly ontological configurations. This also demonstrates that the converse is true, and reversing those material oppressions and reduce those. Their examples just prove that anti-blackness exists, which we agree with, but they have not explained why a Trump protest or Henrietta Lacks means that anti-blackness is an ontological antagonism, and you should not do that work for them. One is history. 500 years is too narrow a frame. The same conditions of native alienation, gratuitous violence, and social death characterized the wars thousands of years ago. That seemed like an ontological antagonism, and they were targeted with gratuitous violence and all conditions of social death, but eventually that changed, which demonstrates that empirics only go negative. Two, human systems are composed of individuals, which means that they are inherently changeable as those individuals change. Now, their spin is wrong. One, their argument relies on a cursory reading of Gordon. Yes, it says slave revolts were one form of resistance. He also supports the suffrage movement, which is very much in line with what debate can build skills to be advocates for. It demonstrates that these can be aligned with the revolutionary ethos of slave revolts. Two, we say that debate and the way that we talk about it can be used for radical processes like prison abolition, because tying particular policy demands to global goals of prison decarceration, anti-militarism is able to catalyze the the two-end framework, and it's a revolutionary reform. It's a concrete expression of systemic critique, which whets the appetite for further change. Way in 14. Getting from where we are, revolutionary transformation is not as simple as clear or for we need a strategy of revolutionary reforms. The revolutionary have always happened in political interaction. We revolutionary movements and more institutional reform-based strategies that foresee sole objectively limited to reforms to be legitimate and achieve also working class engages in struggle with the anti-capitalist implication aspirations revealed through struggle reform. The class forms about its capacity for collective decision and can have a foretaste of emancipation reform, or psychological, ideological, materially for revolution. The movement agree on the need for transitional advance alliances, revolutionary reforms, means a policy agenda that makes concrete gains within capitalism, which provides further movements against capitalism. Here is an example. In 2008, California prison abolitionists in Oakland calls for prisons to provide greater health care to prisoners. While that may seem reformist, it was actually revolutionary because that sent the budget into a tailspin and forced massive decarceration. Third is that maroonage is different from revolt, which means that even if they are right about the Gordon evidence, they do not access this as offense because maroonage is about debating, whereas revolt is just about fighting. Four is here is the gut check. If you are at all confused when you read the Gordon evidence, read it through this lens. Gordon explicitly disagrees with Wilderson and says that his theory is too generalizing and too sweeping. No, our argument is not that we have a way to free them, etc., a particular proposal, but rather that our model of debate provides debaters with the tools to extract their own emancipation. This answers the role of the valid argument because it proves that abandoning, burning down debate is counterproductive. The 2NC also answers this. Now the Wakant argument, they paper over class differences. Jim Crow was so terrifying because it set a cap on how far black people could advance. Modern anti-black racism operates differently. The prison operates alongside economic strata, which is why poor black people are locked up and targeted by police at far greater rates. This disproves their meta theory, because for their theory of ontological antagonism to be correct, it has to implicate all types of black people in the same way. But the fact that economic strata changes that interaction demonstrates that there is a broader political economy at work. In our account is especially true because there was an uptick in white incarceration alongside black incarceration. This is not to deny the uniqueness of anti-black violence, but it does demonstrate that other political factors are a more likely causal factor of that uptick in incarceration. Now, this is offense. It undermines movements when you solidify a bourgeoisie movement. You don't understand what policies have created the phenomenon and results in a rudderless project they cannot correct. This all answers their Wilderson evidence on framework, which relies on the winning thesis of ontology. It also answers, yes, terrain of debate is unfair, but that is structured by macro configurations, and only our framework solves. White and 6. Relations constitute an identity and applicable when an individual plain online relations is allowed to between individuals to the point of contact with an open agency and social structure organization practice where due is seen to work through the social activity can be understood and terms of stage being a social development of individual alcohol habits and more experience with the state usually become performances or produce a better routine without access to so quality called the society is independent of individuals in the party women time given behaviors institutionalized. There must be sets of relations that govern their explanation cannot be reduced to conscious of individual societies as a complex reality that has its own laws. Now you should read violence in the sociological register before ontological. 1. Material conditions, structure, ontology. Someone in a prison has greater facets of social death applying to them than someone who is not. 2 is a corrupt solvency because material conditions would stop participation or fleeing to a maroonage community. Even if they win, their argument is still valuable to secure material change. What good does ontological resistance or understanding do in a world of poverty, suffering, and violence? But people can still find a contingent value even in a world of ontological harm. You should err negative because there is no single falsifiable way to fully determine an ontological claim, but you do have have the capacity to see whether or not one has food on the table or healthcare. The perfect example of healthcare is Medicare, and the Civil Rights Act is an overlooked success story of reformism. Johnson used the skills, the policy debate teaches of a focus to implementation, cost considerations, and allowed for that to be implemented across the South because it organized people who are covert inspections to ensure compliance and condition funding upon desegregation of hospitals. Our evidence is that slash infant mortality and specifically help black women, which means that we have an internal link to their black matrix arguments. I'll finish this Sternberg part, Sternberg 15. Not wanting to attract attention to a quiet call for volunteers more than 1,000 parental agencies offer help along with tens of thousands of civil rights organizers, fellow sector stand out to households to make sure they were compliant. They wouldn't let anyone off the hook. Quickly figured out they were not thinking, and calling on the state undermines legitimacy and human intent. Makes certain advances, they managed to releasing a strategy, social movements, making advances, dominating, working the state away from legitimacy, advance or sitting outside political order. That card stopped outside the political order. The Newman 2010 evidence.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out which card it was outside. Okay, yeah, just the last bit of highlighting. 958, right? 956.
law to explain the relationship between militarism, piracy, and analytic to explain global anti-blackness. Something useful in understanding the global contours of anti-blackness allows us to create new research outside of civil society capable of describing new ways to understand black suffering. We use piracy as a hermeneutic to merge a fugitive space that was always already outside of civil society, but an affirmation of that antagonism, refusal to compromise, and put optimism in existing structures allows for recognition of an affirmation blackness allows people to despise life and death and permanent revolution, which are James Evans's talk about existing ruins. We don't have to solve for all people or individual people. It's not sure, we can't stop Trayvon from getting killed. We can't stop Saddam from being relegated to terrorism. And Cuba argument is that the maroonage portion of the affirmative allows us to connect time and space into a permanent revolution, not a question of can we stop a material form of violence from happening. In fact, our argument is stop being a bitch baby. You can't worry about what comes next, but we have to keep on trekking on because we know what's going on over there is going to be parasitic upon our existence. Their argument / push in the one and R for more material explanations of violence proves why we shouldn't look at violence on terms of sociological register, because it forces us to compromise in existing structures as if we could stop the dereliction and attack to black skin. Our argument is yes, material conditions change, but the ontological position doesn't. We go throughout history, time, space, Jim Crow, slavery, prison, industrial complex, and all of these things that force us to ask questions, sequencing questions, things like should the United States military presence be in Somalia? Answer, obviously fucking not. But the question itself assumes redeemability, that at the end of the question, the United States could be an actor worth legitimizing. Our argument is these sequencing questions strain our relationship to the world and our relationship to the world and the way that we think about politics. Their reading of the Gordon evidence actually proves this, because it indicates that it doesn't happen when the state compromises with you, but when you force the state to compromise, which means even if they win that policy making / policy is good, it only happens when black people refuse to follow the rules, which is just a defensive argument, because we definitely think that your model of debate is shitty, because it leads to conversations like the one that we're having right now. Their argument ignores their arguments against our ontology arguments literally don't make sense. James says this has been the linguistic material economy shape the reality, but over-focus / hyper attention on one allows for you to deny the other, aka focusing policy making ignores the fact that there's no policy that could stop Miley Cyrus from liking to twerk on black women. There's no policy that could remove the criminality attached to black skin, and when we force ourselves into the material positions, it forces us to become complacent with the rest of the world. The Gordon evidence indicates that revolutions have to accumulate. They can't be a bitch baby. You have to fight the good fight, because it's not, but it does never say that we should put redeemability back into existing structures, which is proven dissent, their optimism should prove the dissent, even if should frame your lens for how you look at their model of debate, because even if they win, material progress has happened, they are conceding our argument that it is then weaponized against black people to force them to believe in the state and the government, which was proven by all of their optimism arguments / all the optimistic rhetoric in the one and R. Well, when we did this, we got to this. When we did this, we got to this. All of those things prove our argument. How time doesn't pass, it accumulates in history, and focusing on the sociological register allows for it to weaponize the status quo. The black people in debate, it's told that you should engage in certain model and policy, because at the end of the day, it'll be good for you. When you learn about the nitty-gritty details of the government, you'll be more capable of fighting against them. Our argument is that bullshit. It forces black people into a cruel optimism where we force ourselves in existing institutions, because yes, it feels bad to not know what the answer is, but our argument is do not massage yourself at the end of the debate and say, well, engaging in a topical debate probably could change the fucking world. Not only do we know that's not true, it's not possible, because debate and this resolution is fucking ending, but our argument is that what does not end, what transcends beyond the debate, is the maroon / what it signifies to have a black woman in this position, in this debate. It's not a simple diversity-based argument. It's not an argument that the communities that we create can change the world, but rather that there is internal signifying meaning there is internal signifying meaning by existence, which is our argument about social life and social death. The world is fucked, will always be fucked. I have no faith in the institution of debate, but I do have faith in myself, which is the reason why maroons access all of their arguments. Go onto the framework debate. Debate is not civil society, it's civil war. The balance of blood allegiance to the Maroon community. A choice between taking arms against the state, remaining complicit, and anti-black violence. Debate is neither neutral nor fair, but a side of battle for black and female bodies. The debate is simple. They've now won. Why? Their model debate is good for black people. They've won. If people don't adhere to their model of debate, then we explode limits and ruin the game of debate. That is literally why affirmative revolutionary, because it refuses to adhere to the stronger regulations or rules for productive engagement, destroys the existing model of debate, and allows us to rethink from the actions, even if they win. While other clash-brand arguments are affirmatism predicated off of conversations with the enemy or persuading fucked up people to stop being fucked up. The political energy the affirmative calls for is one that isn't redemptive in existing structures, foregrounds the end of the world. As we know it, you can't separate the body from the voice. Your ballot should be recognition that politics is embodied. We extend our counter-interpretation, holistic interpretation of the resolution. You look at the conditions of possibility, but more important, the state action. Why is it that we think that this resolution is a fucking compromise? Our argument is we have to question the conditions that create the resolution, which is non-being. In order for you to have the productive model of debate you want, it requires that our bodies are fucking here for you to continue the cyclical cycle of debate being productive/good, which is what we've impact turned. You say that you want a fair, cohesive, coherent model of debate. Our argument is that your cohesive model of debate requires our dereliction, which is a Wilderson evidence you've conceded, which impact turns all your framework, truth testing / conversational arguments, because our argument isn't predicated off of some grandiose explanation / conversation we can have for fucking Mimi. I didn't show up to Binghamton because I think that there's some productive conversation between me and her, but instead my body signifies something radically important to black women that I don't think they come to terms with, which is proven by Mimi saying shit like this debate is meaningless, etc., etc., etc. It's fucking not. It's not.
We have 7. multitude of different intersecting oppressions that the F does. It does not deal with things like Somali pirates, but also economic disempowerment, the massive prison complex, etc., are all things that a knowledge and depth of policy is able to solve, especially as it relates to their interconnections, which is the Sudbury card. But they have conceded the internal length and a depth of debate is necessary to gaining the skills to make any of these challenges. A is research. It means that we look over large bodies of literature, are able to compare them and synthesize in order to come to a more complete view of the world, which can then be the basis for how we motivate challenges to the status quo. B is durable subject formation. Entirely conceded. Good and Niemeyer did a study that people who were just told that environmental destruction were happening versus those who took both sides of an issue and debated it. The latter group became much more aware of issues, adjusted their beliefs accordingly, and became advocates in and of themselves, which means only our model of debate, even if imperfect, leads to people who actually change things. They have also conceded that details are key. The government will pull one over on you. It is nuanced, complex, and always moving. Maroon communities do not have the opportunity to withdraw. Instead, they always are a positive act because withdrawal allows co-option by the government, just given by the Jamaica example, where the Maroon community in their evidence literally became the worst slave-catching group of all time, which is not to say that is an inevitability, but instead that you need to understand the state and its machinations to be able to solve in any durable fashion. Now, the role of the ballot in the 1AR was different than it was in the 2AC, which is a demonstration of how the debate has massively drifted. Do not let my last debate end on 2AR explanation that is missing from the 1AR. A lot of this was incredibly tagline buzzwordy, and do not let them establish it. But the role of the ballot is arbitrary, links to all of our predictability claims, because they can have another role of the ballot every debate about different potential analytics, etc., which means that it doesn't lead to the type of creation of skills which are in fact good for black people, because anybody needs to know how the government works, even if you are trying to resist it, which means that we can lose 100% of the case debate and still win, because only a knowledge of the state leads to successful forms of maroonage and resistance. Now they say you can't separate the body. There is no impact to this that is articulated except that we are not a good form of knowledge, but they have conceded the depth of our specificity of examples of both black people and non-black people using that government to challenge anti-racism, etc. Also, you do not need to use the government, but instead, because the government is inevitable, you ought to interact with it. The holistic counter-interpretation is effectively none, because what does that even mean? Infinite number of analytics, etc., which means that you need to be tied to a stable plain text. They've also conceded that we have definitional support. Now, there's a way to discuss the app under the topic in the same issues, like saying that we should remove our presence from Somalia, or saying that even if we removed our presence, the government would not comply, thus proving governmental anti-blackness. All of these means that there are ways within their subject position or that forefront the body that you can talk about the topic, and thus very little of their offense applies because they were so light on the link question. Now, we not need to conclude that we come to the best possible policy as a result of policy debate, because it's a process, not a product, which means that even if the policies are inherently bad, we learn more about them, which means that we use our bodies for good. Now, the argument about presence in this space centering the politics on the horizon of representation in debate is circular. It begs the question of the value of the forum in the first place. You can vote out for visibility for its own sake or negative to make visibility in debate mean something, i.e. to have debate be valuable. The focus on creating spaces and hearing voices is an endless circulation of self-congratulation where we applaud the fact that there are black women higher up in the tournament and thus feel better about ourselves, but do not actually change any meaningful systems of oppression. Instead, we need to train our politics on those structures. In terms of sequencing argument, we need to begin with a discussion of what we can do to gain skills that once we have larger bodies of knowledge that we can then address. They have not answered the fact that because they have not allowed research over their affirmative through not being predictable, having different potential analytics and roles of the ballot, it prevents the negative from determining whether their claims are true or false, which means you should have intense skepticism about all of these claims. It also means that visibility is not useful. The hope argument is a flash in the pan. White is conceded, which is devastating because it implicates the idea of single flashpoint hopes to be useful. Instead, we exist within broader institutions and structures that will crush hope if it comes from the ground up. Instead, we need to focus on materiality first. Now, the case, if we win that anti-blackness is not ontological, one, it disproves that their theory, they have a bad analytic, which means that their role of the ballot goes away, and also that all of their framework offense obviously disappears. Second is it impacts their ability to lead to productive change. If they are visible for promoting a bad practice within value, then it is not very valuable at all. First is the history argument. The anti-blackness thesis relies on 500 years of history. We are at year 200,000 or so of human existence, in which it has not always existed. If it were truly ontological, it should precede existence, period. But the Moors at one point appear to be ontologically dead. Now that seems foolish to us. This demonstrates that the conditions for anti-blackness blackness are also similarly changeable, so because humans are inherently, which means that it is not necessary that the state will always re-entrench these forms, but instead the contingent change can be possible. The second is that the only example and rationale for this is the prison coming from Jim Crow, coming from slavery. Our Jackson evidence specifically indicts this. Jim Crow was a blanket statement about the inferiority of all black people. It had black doctors have to drink at the same water fountains with other black people and had white people all at the other. The prison industrial complex is uniquely different because it discriminates based on class in addition to race, which demonstrates that ontology and anti-black racism is still always in a process of flux, which means that the government can in fact address it, which is demonstrated by our specific examples of things like hospital desegregation, which reduce infant mortality, directly help black women, as well as prison abolition movements, which are demonstrations that policy change spills up. Their view of failure is incredibly narrow. Even if a policy doesn't have intended consequences immediately, it does down the road because it builds on itself, which is the rate card, and degrees of solvency matter even if the ontological register does not change. First is that it conditions ontology. If you are in prison, you have a drastically different ontology, which is defined by material conditions. Second is that it's verifiable.
Answer that compromise stuff on the Gordon double turn. Our framework gives people the
yes,
tools
I
for their
got
own
it.
empowerment.
So they say that their pro-Gordon stuff doesn't say compromise is good, but policy debate is a failure to compromise with the government because it always says that the government is bad. There is no reason they should refuse to compromise with policy debate itself. Policy changes material background. Mildly twerking is not inherently violent in a vacuum, but because of societal arrangements around it, which means that changing materiality is first.
Okay, we have 6:14. case and framework. What is going on?
Somebody must have talked about that bomb on something.
Nuclear power is always ridiculous.
Really good. I'll keep going.
Alright. Anyone not ready? This debate matters. They don't get to change their rhetoric, and coming out of the two in our presence does matter. Maroonish is in some weird community outside of debate, but that presence of black women does create psychic energy for black people, and it's important to recognize that Q is in quarters functions as a sequencing question because black people are quitting debate, and the shifting of debate is crowding out black people, and that there hasn't been a black woman in quarters since 2004. It is a moment of hope for possibility. You should feel good to center blackness as the critique of how we consider the question and still stay in debate. It's not a simple diversity argument that more people and black people, more black people in debate equals better, but that a black woman being successful while refusing to play by the rules is important because even if they are right, the material change is good, and that black people should protest the government. That requires a massive amount of psychic energy that can only be accessed through the accused persons in quarters. It's a form of maroon insolvency, that it is possible to have flights from democracy and Afro-realist strategies which demonstrate the importance of maroonish as political methods. That means you should err on the question of reasonability and question of competition should prefer the method of the after forward and vote out now. James says as a black side work is an instance of maroonish where we recognize that we are fighting the same fight from Trayvon to Assad and onward, that one should refuse to negotiate with the enemy and enter into a permanent revolution, which is on par with their Gordon evidence. I don't think that Turners really respond to all of the examples that they give about hospital and prison reform were forced by black people doing dope shit outside the government until the government was forced to compromise, which means that it's not about black people compromising and negotiating with the government, that the government should be forced to compromise with black people. Now, James says that we have to start the level of black women otherwise racial rape is invariably folded into racial capital. Focus on public violence has ensured that black women are written out of history and that there's no public record of the intimate violence that they experience, which is why you should foreground analysis in the position of captivity. Focus on the political trades-off with the acknowledgement of things that happen outside of legislation, i.e. why Miley Cyrus forced on black women and the criminality marked on black skin that is not negotiated through legislation but rather through a libidinal and linguistic economy, that an over-focus on the material cannot that obfuscates the discussion of those other forms of
literally preferring their model of debate over all of the rhetoric of the 2NR/2NC explanation of this debate being meaningless/worthless. Explain that portion for people who won't flow it.
Wait, sorry, what?
That us being here proves that the rhetoric, the linguistic portion, that their thing that their model of debate overcodes means that you would vote for their model while ignoring intimate violence that happened to the negative.
Right. Okay. Their model assumes an objective capacity to decide between debates based on a resolutional question rather than actually acknowledging the performance within the debate, that debaters engage in anti-black performances would still be voted down because of the resolutional question, which is why you should. Surrender yourself to blackness. The only potential for revolutionary action is by forefronting and centering blackness in one's analysis. White people are guilty until proven innocent, and the ability for one to prove to oneself as an ally is to refuse to engage in anti-blackness and surrender to the destruction of their world. Their Gordon evidence is all the solvency evidence that we need. Even if you don't know what happens after the end of the debate, you should buck up and vote F anyway, because those who don't act because they're uncertain of the result are cowards. Gordon says that rebellions create change, not the government itself, which is why you should not have faith in institutions. Yes, it feels shitty to say that we cannot solve for violence, but that does not mean that you should massage yourself and try to create it anyway. Now we have a weaponization to set that I don't think is answered in the 2NR. Even if material progress has happened, the weaponization of history is used to force black faith within the political, and it eventually leads to more violence, which is why BLM, Ferguson, Baltimore, etc. is examples of black people making demands on the government. But when black people did that, they were met with violence, tear gas, etc. Which is why when Mimi says that forefronting these types of understanding is what spills over into the public, they should also be held culpable when they say that black people should make demands on the government to try and change it. Now, framework proper. They did not answer a counter-interpretation, essentially conceded all of their offense is captured through a holistic understanding of the resolution because we discussed military presence and the possibilities and impossibilities that have allowed the resolution to happen. Now, the topical version of the AFA does not solve first. It links to the James evidence and it creates a public-private dichotomy that doesn't understand the ways in which intimate violence is subsumed within the political and focused on legislation is a red herring because the way that the government operates is drastically changed through neoliberalism. Now, their maroonage argument does not make sense. We are not about physical maroonage or escaping to other communities. Also, this card is about Jamaica. The app is a form of imminence that connects meaning of accumulating rebellions throughout time, which means that it's not about whether maroon communities in the 1800s were successful and led to slave capturing, but rather that marooners, as a hermeneutic, can understand the ways in which black people can test the anti-black structure. Now, the truth-testing argument that they have conceded that our argument is not about how we come to debate to create a grandiose discussion, but rather that anti-blackness is not something that can be determined through objective truth, and their search for truth is not something that can be resolved through debate. Now, I think it's pretty absurd that they assume that debate can lead to any part of that interpretation. Now, one, accused presence is required for them to have their model of debate in order to understand what is limited, what is predictable, what is free, etc. It's the inclusion of black people to be purposefully excluded, i.e. to have their model of debate and say that black people can still be included within debate, who point to accused presence and say that, hey, we still have black people included within debate while forcibly excluding them is the problem with their model. Second is that unfreedom is everywhere, and the notion that if we don't defend a plan, the government will backlash is disproven by the fact that a black person being killed gratuitously at any time just for being black, not because it defied their statement because of the way the black is overdetermines identity. Third is that they're just factually incorrect about the top-down approach to politics, which are James evidence and impact turns the idea of top-down solutions that start the material of what says that we must start with the black matrix, and if you don't, public violence overcomes black violence, which is the reason why, even though they say hospital reform happened, they still ignore how Henrietta Lacks's cells were physically stolen because of that reform.